So it is my privilege, my honor, what a distinction here, to introduce the president of the Tewksbury Historical Society, Doug Sears.
Well, thank you very, very much, Robert. This is a great group. Maybe standing room only, but Bob, he's always great at making things work. This is a good day for really for us to have so many people interested in the history of the town. And in particular, that we have another sort of chapter in a book about that for those who are here with us today and those in the future who may want to know something about it. I just want to encourage the Tewksbury Historical Society is a opportunity for individuals. Everybody has their own story, no matter where you come from. No matter where your relatives live or wherever, everyone has an important story, and to be able to explore it, I think, is one of the great joys of life. And I know that I'm probably preaching to the converted over here because that's something that brings you here today. So what we as the Historical Society endeavor to do is to do events like this and just get people interested in coming here to the library, using the library's internet resources. There are programs on genealogical study available here, and we are really blessed with this facility and blessed with the opportunities that exist for us to explore our own stories. Well, without going too much further on that, I've been also blessed to know Dick Howe over the years, chiefly as a befuddled attorney trying to file something at the Registry of Deeds. And if I didn't know something, Richard definitely would very politely, he's a quiet guy, and very polite. They said, perhaps if you did it the way you're supposed to, it would, but let me show you and help you how it goes. And he has followed his own history in Lowell, his own family history, very much part of Lowell, and throughout his career has published books, he's spoken many places, as his blog, and was just as recently as this morning was out conducting a historic tour of Lowell Cemetery, which I hope you might just give a couple of minutes on. It's a bit of a commercial. But so we're very pleased that at this particular time that when we're having this book out, which you have the opportunity to purchase later on for $25, that a portion of the history that is not well known can come out through Richard's talk today, because there were 4 times in the history from 1834 up to about 1908 or so, there are 4 times that parts of Tewksbury became Lowell. And so Richard will explain to us when these happened, why these happened, and all of the rest. So I'm not going to steal any more of his thunder, so I present this over to Dick Howe.
Well, thank you, Doug, and thanks everyone for coming. And my name is Richard Howe. I have a website. It's richardhowe.com, and I write about Lowell and Greater Lowell history and politics. And it also has my email address on it, so if you ever need to get in touch with me, that's the best way to do it. I did retire as Registered Deeds for the Middlesex North District on December 31st, 2024, after serving in that capacity for 30 years. Tewksbury is one of the towns in the district. So if I don't know you, I knew your deeds and how much you owe on your mortgage, but we'll leave that aside. But one of my passions in life has been history, and because I live in Lowell history really rose to the forefront. And Since my retirement, I tell people I feel like I'm busier now than I was then, and it's mostly because there's just so much to study and learn and write and talk about. I did give a tour of the Lowell Cemetery. It's a little further down Route 38 this morning. I've got the same tour again tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. So if you're not doing anything tomorrow morning, feel free to show up for that. And we spend about 90 minutes walking around talking about different people buried in the cemetery. Today we're going to talk about how portions of Tewksbury were annexed to Lowell through the years. Now, this is an important time historically for the city of Lowell because next year, 2026, will be the city's bicentennial. The charter that established first the town of Lowell was issued by the Massachusetts State Legislature on March 1st, 2026. And so there's going to be a lot of activities around that event and the rise of the mills. But one thing that's always intrigued me is that the first English settlers arrived in what is now Lowell 200 years before that. So we're sort of at a point where the same amount of time from now back to the founding of Lowell, it's equal to the time from the founding of Lowell back to the establishment of the first English settlement. And so before there was Lowell, there were Tewksbury, Billerica, Chelmsford. And so besides just talking about the Tewksbury annexations, I'm going to show you glimpses of the other parts of other towns that were connected to Lowell. And there'll be maps and pictures. And I've tried to dig into the reasons why these annexations occurred. I've gained some insight, which I'll share with you, but more remains to be done. So maybe you'll invite me back in a couple of years to finish the story. And thank you to Robert for, it's always a great sigh of relief when the first slide advances with your audio visual. So this map is from 1670, and it depicts what is now Lowell, downtown Lowell. And you kind of have to have your brain tip up and down, but as you can see, the Concord River is probably the best landmark going from the bottom to the top. It then runs into the Merrimack River. And what's important to understand about Lowell is that downtown Lowell was originally a Native American village, an indigenous people. It was called Wamasett. So on either side of the river, the Concord River, on the south side of the Merrimack, it was a Native American settlement. When the first English settlers who wanted to homestead there came up the Concord River, they wanted to take the natives' land because it was already cleared. But because the the colonial legislature was still sympathetic to the indigenous people at that time, they said, no, move up the Merrimack a couple of miles and you can establish your town there. And that's how Chelmsford came into being. So you have Billerica on the right, Chelmsford on the left, and the unmarked territory, you can just barely see it running vertically. It says Indian land. So that was actually an established community called Wamasett. Now, I have a confession to make. These pictures weren't contemporaneously taken. These were generated by artificial intelligence. I've always been interested in technology and its intersection with history, and you've probably heard a lot about AI. So I wanted to show you an example of the types of pictures it can generate. And I used, it's called Google Gemini. It's free. Now the one on the left, I typed in, show a wagon pulled by 2 horses of the type used in New England in the early 1700s, and fill it up with apples and corn and have a man driving it. And it spun around for about 10 seconds, and that's what it gave me. And I said, that's great, except the hat makes it look like the Grapes of Wrath rather than 1776. And I went back and said, could you replace the hat with a tricorn hat of the type used in the resolution? And it spun around and around and around, and it gave me the exact same picture. So I said, well, I'll quit while I'm ahead. Now, the one on the right is a little bit better. I asked, give me a sample of a type of boat used as a ferry on rivers in New England in the 1700s. And it spit that out. And I suspect that's probably what they look like. And so what became Lowell back in 1700 to the Revolutionary War was farmland, but it was also a transportation hub. And I think when we talk about the pre-Revolutionary War history of this entire region, it's really critically important to keep that in mind. And it's because from the time the Pilgrims arrived up until we won independence, the success of the English colonies really depended on the extraction of raw materials from the interior and transporting them to the seacoast where they could be traded. Now, for farm products, that largely meant bringing them south through New Hampshire, crossing the Merrimack using one of the several local ferries, or using wagons from the northwest, from Vermont, the Connecticut River Valley, kind of diagonally coming down through Chelmsford, Tewksbury, Billerica, and heading on to Boston. Now, the second means of transportation was the Merrimack River itself. We all know that the English Navy ruled the world. Well, it did when they had wooden ships and they needed the lumber from someplace. And that's where the forests of New Hampshire became so important. Giant pine trees in northern New Hampshire would be cut down, trimmed, and then rolled into the Merrimack River. And they'd be bundled into rafts. They'd float them down the river trying to get to Newburyport, which was a major shipbuilding center, but also was an embarkation port for these giant masts that would timber that would be used for masts to ship to England. That worked great until you got to the Pawtucket Falls in what is now Lowell. And if you let the logs go over the falls, you would end up with a load of kindling rather than ship's masts. And by the way, I'm going to get to Tewksbury in a minute. It's just a long way of getting there. So instead of letting the wood go over the falls, they'd pull it out of the river above the falls and use oxen and horses to drag it along the shore beneath the falls and then put it back in the river and continue its journey. Now, it was very inefficient, but there was no alternative. And that's how it stayed until the end of the Revolutionary War. That's when a group of merchants from Newburyport decided to build a canal that circumvented the Pawtucket Falls. And it was a private enterprise. They got a corporate charter from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. They called themselves the proprietors of the locks and canals on Merrimack River. It actually, I believe, is the oldest continuously operating corporation in Massachusetts because it's been absorbed by a successor company. But this map depicts the route of the Pawtucket Canal. It took advantage of the topography of the area, an existing stream. It avoided a big hill, the School Street Hill, if you're familiar with that. And it flowed into the Concord River about where the UMass Lowell Inn and Conference Center is. And then from the Concord River, it was just a short ride up to the Merrimack and on to Newburyport. And they used 4 lock chambers to handle the 32-foot difference in elevation of the river. It worked really well, and they charged tolls, and it was very successful. And here's an example of a lock chamber. But these guys didn't have a monopoly on canal construction. A competing company a few years later built the Middlesex Canal, which came off the Merrimack a little bit farther upriver and then traveled 27 miles through Middlesex County to Boston, downtown Boston, right about where the Fleet Center is. So you get a lot more for your goods in Boston than Newburyport, so all the traffic diverted to the Middlesex Canal. The Pawtucket Canal basically went out of business. And that's how it stayed for about another 10 or 15 years. In the meantime, this guy enters the picture, Edward St. Lo Livermore. He was born in New Hampshire, and he became a very prominent figure in New Hampshire legal circles and politics. He was a lawyer, he was a judge, he was the state attorney general, and he was kind of based in Portsmouth and Exeter. And I think at some point in life, probably in his late 50s, he kind of got tired of that. And he decided he wanted to go elsewhere. And he wanted a more bucolic setting where he wouldn't be bothered by the bustle of everyday life. And so somehow he learned about this hill that overlooked the Merrimack River where the Concord River flowed into it. It was a great big house there. It was called the Gedney Mansion because the guy that built it was named Gedney. It was also painted yellow. This is not a picture of that house. This is like a placeholder. And so Livermore bought that house, probably in about the time of the War of 1812. And he moved in, and he loved it because he could look out his front window, and there's the Concord River flowing into the Merrimack. There's not another house in sight. And he loved the view so much that he called the house Belvedere, which means beautiful view, although a local Latin teacher might correct me if that's not correct. And he remained there, and he raised a family there. And so that would be on the east side of the Concord River. Now, I'll jump forward several decades. Eventually, that yellow house was purchased by an order of Roman Catholic nuns, and they made it into a hospital, and that became St. John's Hospital, and so which is now Saint's Medical Center. It's the St. John's campus of St. Medical. And so this is a picture of an early building of St. John's that replaced Livermore's house. But this is not an AI. These are actually people, in case you recognize them, although it does look kind of AI-ish. And this is from a history of Lowell. The village became Belvedere Village. Gained a rough reputation due in part to the carousing and excessive rum drinking in various taverns and cottages along the river. Remember back to the transportation hub? There was a ferry where the Bridge Street Bridge is now. There was another ferry further up the river, and there was a ferry where the Concord River was before a bridge was installed. And people ran taverns. You know, if you're riding your wagon from 4 o'clock in the morning in central New Hampshire and you get to, you go through Pelham and you come down and you cross the ferry, you're tired, you're thirsty, you want some refreshment. And so, it developed sort of a rowdy reputation. So this place, Belvedere Village, was sort of like upscale with people like Livermore living there in their mansions, but also had an earthier side to it. And so in the midst of all this, these guys from Boston show up. On the left is a mill they created in Waltham, Massachusetts in 1814. On the right is a silhouette of Francis Cabot Lowell, the man who inspired this. This mill in Waltham was sort of groundbreaking in the United States. Raw cotton would enter on the first floor and emerge as a finished cotton cloth up top. Before that, it was done piecemeal. It was done in houses. It was done scattered. But these guys centralized it. They funded it with capital. They had a skilled workforce. It was a huge success, and they needed to expand. So they were looking for more water power, The Charles River only dropped 6 feet at Waltham. They looked for a bigger drop in the river. And that drew their attention to the Pawtucket Falls in what became Lowell. November 1821, these guys show up, they look, they say, hey, this has a lot of potential. Now, of course, they didn't go up to the farmers who owned the land and say, hey, we want to buy your land to build this great mill village. They sent a local who was their agent around to quietly buy the land up so that the price didn't go up. And he bought a lot of land. Let me jump ahead. Okay. This is the map I wanted to show you. So this is sort of the same map I showed earlier. But all of the cross-hatched part is where mills were actually constructed. And the vertical lines are land that the mill owners bought and controlled. And you can see that's almost everything within the Pawtucket Canal, everything to the west side of the Concord River. That was all owned by the mills. And so people who came to Lowell had to live somewhere. And to the right of the Concord River, the place labeled Belvedere, that was pretty open. It had been farmland, it has a couple of mansions, and it has the rowdy element. So people start moving over there who wanted to work in Lowell. The managers, people who came like lawyers, doctors, they all find that to be a desirable address. Lowell got its town charter 1826. 1832, John and Thomas Nesmith, two kind of entrepreneurs, they started in New Hampshire, they opened a business in New York City. They heard about this opportunity for growth in this place called Lowell. They liquidated their store in New York City. They came to Lowell as real estate developers, and they purchased Livermore's mansion, and more importantly, the 200 acres that came with it. They immediately created a subdivision and started selling off the lots. And this is all, Washington Square is what is now known as Kittredge Park. So the road that runs from the lower left to the upper right is Nesmith Street, and the road that runs vertically to the right of the park is Andover Street, just to acquaint you. And so again, this is where all the big shots chose to live. But remember, it's not Lowell, it's Tewksbury. And that's because the original grant of Lowell only covered this area. You can see the right-hand boundary is the Concord River. And I've got these points numbered, and I have pictures to coincide with them. So the upper left would be UMass Lowell's South Campus, the Lowell Humane Society. And if you head southwest to Cross Point, and then you head east to the Route 495 where it crosses the Concord River, and then north along the Concord River till you get to the Lowell Memorial Auditorium. So everything on the west side of the Concord River is Lowell. Everything on the Lowell Memorial Auditorium side is Tewksbury. Okay, all these people who work in Lowell and live in Tewksbury are saying, wait a minute, why do we have to go all the way to Tewksbury Center to participate in democracy, to partake in town meeting? They're taking our taxes and we're really not getting anything for it. We've got a lot closer ties to Lowell, so why don't we become part of Lowell? Well, the people of Tewksbury really didn't want that because they were getting taxes from the people that lived in this Belvedere village, because compared to the rest of Tewksbury, it was pretty densely packed and the people were fairly wealthy. So what happened was the people of Belvedere Village kind of waged a guerrilla campaign against the rest of Tewksbury. Now, this is a quote from a letter from a Mr. Hedrick, who lived at the time of the annexation in Belvedere. he said, the rough element succeeded in passing a resolution to the next Tewksbury town meeting shall be held in Belvedere. This was too much. The townsmen finally capitulated and consented to the annexation. So the first group, the people that wanted to go, really wanted to go, and the rest of the town didn't want them to go. But, I mean, one of the things that came with Lowell and the mills was enormous wealth, and just as now, then, enormous wealth came with enormous political influence. And so when it got down to Beacon Hill, the pro-annexation side won out. 1834, an act to set off part of the town of Tewksbury to Lowell. Here's the triangle of that. Again, if you start at the auditorium, you go down the Concord River to, this is Billerica Street, so this is the back part of Lowell Cemetery on Lawrence Street. And then you come over to the river, the south bank of the river, opposite where Pentucket Street runs into Andover Street. So it's not that far out Andover Street. 1836, Lowell has just exploded on the scene. In 10 years, it's gone from 200 people to 20,000. It's the second biggest place in Massachusetts. It becomes a city. And I'll speed through these other places. Again, looking for housing that wasn't owned by the mills. They looked across the Merrimack. There was a bridge on Bridge Street. And they looked to a part of Dracut that was called Central Village. And they sought to annex that. And they did, and it became known as Centerville. And that's sort of the outline of that. It was Aiken Street, out to Methuen Street and Dracut, over to Duck Island, along the Lowell Lawrence Boulevard, and then back. 1874 was a big year for Lowell, because there were 3 different annexations. The first came from Chelmsford. It was all of the Upper Highlands and Middlesex Village. So you can just see how big an area this was. Again, starting at the Humane Society, the South Campus, to Cross Point. Remember, that was the original boundary. So now we go all the way out to Drum Hill and to the Rourke Bridge. So everything from basically Stevens Street or Wilder Street in Lowell to the Chelmsford line now was added. Dracut, another big annexation, 2,100 acres. This is the rest of Centerville. All of Pawtucketville was added to Lowell. And then also, not to be forgotten, 1874, a chunk of Tewksbury. This was like going out Andover Street, and then 1888, even another portion of Tewksbury was annexed. So this shows the part that those 2 annexations, which totaled 430 acres, you can see Lowell Cemetery and Fort Hill are included. So again, from Pentucket to Buttman, and then Buttman over to Rogers Street, and then to Boylston Street where the railroad track is. So by 1888, that was affixed to Lowell. And so in Lowell, that came with a burden because the Lowell said, well, it's doubled our area, but this large increase in population demands corresponding appropriations, plans, and measures. Again, the people who were next wanted to go. And I think one of the reasons was they could get access to city-provided water, city-provided sewage. A lot of the infrastructure that we now take for granted as part of urban living wasn't available to a town, a rural town, but they were available to the city. And that's what caused people to want to join. And in this case, it sounds like some of the people at Tewksbury were like, yeah, it's okay, go ahead. It doesn't seem like there was much opposition in the town. And then the final annexation was 1906. This was the rest of Belvedere, where Colley Stadium, Clark Road are, and the part called Wigginville, which is like Boylston Street, or the exit off of Route 495, like where the gas station and the Dunkin' Donuts are. So you can see that covers a pretty big area. And again, going out to Andover Street and the Tewksbury line, over to Rogers Street at the Tewksbury line, and then Boylston Street at the Tewksbury line, Woburn Street, and then Rogers at Putnam again. So there's a compilation of all of the various annexations, with the last one happening in 1906. All right, well, thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Before we get something for you. Say, we're happy, Nancy and I, to present Richard. He's the first one to officially get a copy of the new book and a letter from us. Okay. And thank you very, very much. We have had a lot of fun, challenges, brain scratching, and a lot going on in putting this little book together. I want to start talking about personal journey a little bit, and then Nancy will talk about how she's the most persevering person I know, okay? And the daunting project of getting all of these pictures that people have given us into the form of the book that you'll soon have in your hands, I'll let her gild her own lily on that one. But a personal journey, I grew up in Concord, and that's at the Colonial Inn there on my father's 90th birthday back in 2009. My aunt Carol gave me a little bit of insight. So I lived as a school teacher in Fessenden School in West Newton, and in 1915 they went from there to the Colonial Inn for their honeymoon. And what my Aunt Carol said was that he freaked out his bride, Edith, my, of course, grandmother, by saying, okay, let's go visit the relatives, which meant this history teacher took her up into Sleepy Hollow Cemetery in Tewksbury, in Concord. And there I saw an interesting name named Sereno Hunt and Louisa Hunt, which were, they're my grandparents on my my grandfather's mother's side. And I said, well, let's try to find out who these people are. And I found out, for example, in 1854, that Sereno Hunt was the principal and only teacher at Concord High School. And so, well, it's a line of high school teachers that go. And then I went to the Concord Library, and they have the old archive section. I said, well, let's look up who these Hunts are, because I've heard the Hunts are instrumental in Tewksbury, and I found out that there were Hunts that came to Concord with Peter Bulkley, who was looked at as the father of Concord, the minister of the first church there where I was ordained a minister in 1976, okay, to the Unitarian Universalist ministry. And looking there, say, well, there was William Hunts came and they stayed in Concord. And the Isaac Hunts, which I grew off from, went to Sudbury. And then there was someone named Samuel Hunt who went off to Ipswich. And he then had a son who was called Samuel II, and the rest is history we're beginning to know. So what I would say have contributed to the history of Tewksbury a bit is going back and placing where these folks were when they were in England and how they ended up getting over here, because I had not seen that put in any one place. So that my major contribution to this was to do the introduction and to set it. And then Nancy can take it over from here, as she did such a wonderful job doing all the grunt work, going through the pictures. Many people here actually have contributed over the time to whatever we happen to have. We drew from that to put this book together. So Nancy, if you would let us know about that, I would love to hear.
Well, thank you so much, Doug. I do want to reiterate the importance of his contribution, because everything in the town, all the books and different write-ups, start with Samuel Hunt being the father of the town. And we go from there. And so Doug has answered the question as to how did Samuel Hunt land on the Tewksbury, or what was Billerica, side of the Merrimack Valley, right near where today is Hunts Falls, off, on the Merrimack River. He explains all of that in the book. And the people that eventually surrounded him in settling, found they were way too far away from Billerica Center, and so they decided to form a separate town, which became Tewksbury. And so I feel so strongly that that is an essential part of the history of Tewksbury that's been added to the compilation of books and history books and write-ups. So I do appreciate that, and thank you so much, Doug, for doing that. Yeah, so the book is a compilation of really work that has gone on for several decades by other people, people in the past in the town. You had Taddy Brown, you have Robert Haynes, that saw and had a vision that we need to save these pictures. And it's amazing to me how purposeful they were. And really the job that they did was really quite stunning. And then decades later, another group of people came ahead and said, look at all these glass slides. There are boxes of them. And those were, pre-members, certainly before my time on the board, who sat and developed those slides into pictures. They were assembled into binders, very orderly, with indexes and as much information as they could add to those. And so we are here with all of that information. And so given today's ability to, digitize and do books and do videos, we wanted to make sure we brought forth as much as we could from this collection. This is a very, very small amount from the collection. And I would like to say that dealing with the Arcadia book publishers is a pleasure. They have set rules about how the book will be assembled, what pages, have, the chapter starts, what pages have the index, what pages have the chapters, et cetera. And so you have to kind of fit what you want to do with what they like to have in their books. How the pages are set up is the same in all of their books. So, you might say, why is this book why is this picture up towards the top of the page? And they have found that that's the best way to show off that picture. And so something that might seem odd is actually for a reason. They also use the Chicago style publishing, and it's a little different than what you might see, and things might be like, oh, that looks like an error, but it's not, it's the way they like it. So if you keep that in mind while you read the book, and also in general, I think the book shows the town's community spirit, patriotic spirit, pride in a town. It shows some of the decorum in the early years, particularly the 200th anniversary parade. People were at the parade, lined up, men with suits and ties, with hats, women with hats and dresses and gloves. standing beside as the parades went by, where the people of the parade were equally dressed, full uniform, full everything, parading with their flags just so. And so it really harkens to a time of, full pride, full respect, and full community. I'll leave it at that. I think people probably have some questions. Doug and I will be here, and I don't know if people have questions already, but we'll open it up, I suppose, for that. And I thank you so much for coming. It's so heartening to see so many people here that are interested in the history of the town. So thank you so much.
How are we going to work this? So I believe we are going to have refreshments at this time or after?
Yeah, we can break and
We
start
thought,
doing more.
you have to stand up and stretch and everything, and we've got a few refreshments over here, and then we will try to, in an orderly fashion, be able to, if you want, autograph the books. As it's $24.99, but please don't ask for them. We do have pennies, but we will, I tried to go to the bank and get new ones, but they had run out of those. But thought that little touch would be nice. But anyways, okay, we have a question over there. Yes, sir.
What about the Trout family? They used to have the King's Charter inside the golf course on the wall.
I say.
What about the Trout family? They used to have the King's Charter inside on the wall.
Well, the Trull, that Captain Trull he's in there. He was the grandson of Samuel Hunt II, and they had a grant, and they were very. Through this whole Hunt family, there weren't that many people around. They all knew each other, and they all had farms. And one of the things I find in the book is interesting. I mean, if you take a picture of a house, well, the house has got 20, 30, 60 acres that goes with it along Main Street. Now, the Captain Trull was the one who fired off 3 shots on, when the British regulars were coming, and we learned about it to let the folks in Drake know what was going on, and time to come and march toward down Billerica Road, Billerica Road to Concord to Miriam's Corner. So that's one aspect in the book of the Trull family. I also add that we only went through the pictures that we had. And many of the pictures that we had aren't totally representative of what you would find. You say, well, what about this house, or what about that house? Well, if somebody hadn't taken a picture of it back in the day, we don't have it, or they may have had it, but it was not very in focus. Or we didn't really know it was a nice house, but we didn't know whose it was. So these are some of the things that Nancy, the superlative researcher, was able to pull together. And when I first sort of looked at the captions, I said, my God, I'm learning an awful lot. And I learn every time I reread the book. So what I find very interesting is there's the progression in the book. It follows right through, and they say, well, we were very special at that time. It's we're talking about from the sort of the beginnings up through the 1950s or so. The patent book of the 1934 town celebration, 200 years, builds a lot into the more present time. So we tried to make a bit of a gap between the Pride book, the Reverend Pride in 1883 on one end. And by the way, it's kind of interesting, and as you know from reading the Pride book, it was a series of lectures. And he said, I'm really find this no pride of authorship or anything. Everybody knows these stories. And of course, that's really the only thing that we have for those particular times. And the patent book brings us more to the 1934, but we're trying to fill the gap between those two, and we'll have your opinions, I'm sure, as to how successfully we did or not. Yes.
I've seen the back book.
Yes, it's in the library here too. Yeah.
Someone I know has a copy, and it's just fascinating.
Absolutely.
Did you use that as a reference?
Oh yes, yes. I mean that was a major reference. Anything we could find that it was giving us information about the period, and we have that online, right, in the Tewksbury Historical Society website. Yeah.
Most of that was the center of town and on Tewksbury and hardly anything over the other side of the Shawshene River. Then there's another book put together that it's the Silver Lake book.
Yeah.
It's like South Tewksbury.
Well, I'm a swamper from South Tewksbury, so I appreciate this. Yeah, that was the East Boston Riviera back in the day. That the train you could come out and it's, this is 1948, I believe. That's when the cabins out there and the little pieces of land then became houses and winterized and everything. So that whole community developed. And yes, there is a book on that. Well, and we're encouraging, everybody to do their own research on your own family home. You got Dick Howe here. He's a past master of deeds and a continuing, able to go in and do a search on your house and see what the land was. I mean, the house wasn't there for a long time, maybe, but maybe the land was, and find out who owned it. Yes, you had a railroad question. I thought I saw you put your hand. He's one of the railroad guys who quietly is taking pictures and everything, and maybe we can get you to speak one day.
I would be happy to, because, if I could just take a minute. I've been in town for 31 years. My name's Tad Anderson. I'm in South Tewksbury, and you caught my attention on one thing, because where you mentioned the Shawshene River, one thing that was unique, we had to have, when landlines were around, a Wilmington phone number as opposed to a Tewksbury number, because being on 10th Street. But a presentation I had seen in the past, I guess Bill Wyatt was the guy's name, showing the rail lines when they were active. It gave me an idea. Now, I went out and I took digital images, and my son, who was 14, it was April of 2015, they're already 10 years old. A few things have changed. I've seen a few obliterations in some of the areas, like off Boston Road, some new development, and like to add a sequel. But I would like to show, because a lot of it's pretty much the same. It could kind of be like, say, a then and now type of thing, even though we're
well, maybe you can develop that. That would be wonderful. Thank you. Do we have other questions before you raid the cookies? Okay. Okay, if not, go at them, and we'll try to get your book. When you want one, we'll try to sign them if you would like that. Okay.